They terminated me on a Thursday evening at 8:53 p.m., which felt like a very deliberate choice. Not a Monday, when the week still stretches ahead with the theoretical promise of redemption. Not a Friday, when at least you could drown the humiliation in weekend plans. A Thursday. Like they wanted me to spend one final workday watching the clock tick toward a meeting I didn't know was coming, sitting in a building I'd spent 14 years holding together with my bare hands. Vincent Aldridge delivered the news with the practiced ease of a man who'd rehearsed it in the mirror twice and decided he looked great both times. He stood in the doorway of the server operations center at Callaway Wealth Management, silk tie knotted with surgical precision, cufflinks catching the overhead light like he'd polished them for the occasion. Which, knowing Vincent, he probably had. "We're moving in a different direction, Emily," he said, and his voice had that particular brand of corporate warmth that feels like being wrapped in a blanket made of sandpaper. "Effective immediately. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 47 years old. Former military intelligence signals analyst turned senior infrastructure security architect at Callaway Wealth Management, which is a title that sounds genuinely important until you understand it means I'm the woman who stands between $12 billion in client assets and every sophisticated criminal enterprise on Earth who would very much like to make those $12 billion disappear. I've been doing it for 14 years through 3 market crashes, a one-coordinated phishing campaign that came within 11 minutes of compromising our entire East Coast client base, and more vice presidents than I've had haircuts, which is saying something because I keep mine practical and I keep my infrastructure even more so. Vincent Aldridge had been SVP of Digital Strategy for 8 months. 8 months of mandatory innovation workshops, 8 months of slide decks about synergistic disruption, 8 months of watching him replace the word security with friction in every conversation like they were synonyms. He smelled like expensive cologne and the specific kind of confidence that only comes from never having faced genuine consequences for a single decision in your entire professional life. "You're moving in a different direction," I said, on keeping my voice the temperature of a server room in February. "The night before a federal compliance review. Quarterly assessment," he corrected, adjusting one cufflink. "Not federal. Callaway can handle a routine assessment with a modernized team." The quarterly assessment was being conducted by examiners from FINRA, Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, the people who can suspend your license, levy fines that make executive bonuses look like loose change, and refer matters to the SEC when they find something that smells like fraud or catastrophic negligence. Calling it routine was like calling open heart surgery a minor procedure because the patient was already on the table. "The modernized team," I said. "Brianna starts Monday," Vincent said. "She has a fresh perspective. Now she understands where financial technology is heading." Brianna Aldridge, 24 years old, Vincent's niece through his wife's side, a detail he never mentioned but everyone in the building knew because gossip in a financial firm travels faster than a market correction. She had a bachelor's degree in communications, a 4-month boot camp certification in something called Agile FinTech Leadership, and a LinkedIn profile that listed her current role as Digital Transformation Catalyst, which is the kind of title you invent for yourself when no established profession will claim you. I had met her twice. The first time, she asked me why we didn't just use the cloud for everything, and got visibly annoyed when I explained that we already did, carefully, with layers of encryption and access controls that kept it from becoming a catastrophic liability. The second time, she told me our dashboard interface was clunky, and she had some amazing ideas for streamlining it. When I asked if she'd reviewed the compliance requirements that governed every element of that interface, she said the word compliance like it was something she'd stepped in on the sidewalk. "Brianna," I said, "who asked me last week if a VPN was a type of router. She disrupts conventional thinking." "Vincent." I manage the security infrastructure for $12 billion in retirement assets, teachers, municipal workers, nurses who spent 30 years putting money away so they could eventually stop working 18-hour shifts. Disrupting the systems that protect those assets is not an innovation strategy. It is a federal offense. He held up a hand. The hand had a manicure, buffed nails, cuticles attended to, the hand of a man who had never in his professional life had to stay until 2 a.m. because a system was throwing errors that could cascade into something catastrophic if left unaddressed. Emily, the assessment panel loved Brianna's presentation on client experience modernization. She has a vision for where this company's technology needs to go. She presented to the assessment panel. Informally, they were impressed. I sat with that information for 3 full seconds, doing the mental arithmetic on what Brianna Aldridge presenting an informal modernization pitch to FINRA examiners might have communicated about how seriously Callaway Wealth Management took regulatory infrastructure. "You're making a mistake," I said. "The kind that shows up in regulatory findings and congressional testimonies." "We appreciate your 14 years of service," Vincent said, with the finality of a man who considers the conversation concluded. "HR will have severance paperwork to you by morning. Standard 2-week package. Marcus from Night Security will escort." "I need to finish the integrity audit sequence," I said, turning back to my monitors. "I've been running pre-assessment checks on the compliance database for 3 hours. There's a verification loop I need to close before anyone else touches these systems." "Step away from the terminal, Emily." I looked at the screens. 4 monitors showing the architecture of everything I'd built, everything I'd defended, the entire digital scaffolding that kept $12 billion where it belonged. Transaction verification matrices, client authentication layers, encrypted audit trails going back 14 years, every one of them legally required to be intact and verifiable on demand. The language of financial security, which I have spoken fluently since before Brianna Aldridge learned to drive. I thought about my son Oliver and his university tuition, automatic payment, 2nd month of the semester, my mortgage, which was not optional, the health insurance I'd lose in 30 days. 47 years old and terminated is not a career inconvenience. It's a financial demolition job performed with a very casual swing. "You're genuinely certain about this?" I said. "Completely." I closed my open diagnostic windows one by one, picked up my worn olive canvas jacket from the back of my chair, the one I bought at a military surplus sale in Fort Jackson the year I transitioned out of service, back when I still believed civilian life would be simpler. I collected my insulated coffee mug, the framed photo of Oliver at his high school graduation, my personal encrypted hard drive, which I unplugged and tucked into my jacket's interior pocket with the quiet deliberateness of someone removing the last load-bearing component from a structure before the inspection team arrives. Marcus, the night security guard, was a decent man forced into an indecent situation. He'd been doing this job for 11 years. He knew my coffee order. He'd shown me pictures of his daughter's kindergarten graduation twice, beaming both times. Now he was standing in my doorway with an expression of genuine misery, tasked with walking me out like I'd been caught stealing. "Not your fault," I told him as we reached the elevator. "Just doing the job." "I'm real sorry, Ms. Carter," he said quietly. "Don't be sorry. Just make sure nobody touches the red flag diagnostic on monitor 3 before someone who knows what they're doing looks at it." He nodded like he understood, even though I knew he wouldn't be able to do anything about it, because by tomorrow morning, someone who didn't understand what they were looking at would be sitting in my chair. The elevator descended through 14 floors of built infrastructure. My infrastructure. I designed the redundancy protocols during a weekend when everyone else was at a conference in Miami that I'd declined because a system migration was running 3 hours behind schedule. I'd rebuilt the authentication architecture after the 2019 phishing incident, Alone, over 72 hours, surviving on gas station coffee and the grim satisfaction of doing something that actually mattered. I'd installed the fail-safe backup system that nobody knew existed because I'd done it quietly, methodically, the way I did everything, without announcing it or turning it into a presentation slide. When the elevator hit the lobby, I remembered my parking access badge was still clipped to the monitor frame. Marcus offered to retrieve it. We went back up. The elevator opened onto the 14th floor, and I stepped into a different atmosphere entirely. The careful quiet of security infrastructure was gone, replaced by something that sounded like it belonged in a co-working space in a trendy neighborhood. Ambient electronic music. Soft and self-congratulatory, like a soundtrack designed to make mediocrity feel like visionary thinking. Brianna Aldridge was already there. She was sitting in my chair. My ergonomic chair, the one I'd brought from home after the company-issued option destroyed my lower back during a 2021 system migration that ran 4 straight days. She looked exactly like every startup pitch deck stock photo imagined a digital disruptor should look. Flawless blowout, oversized blazer over a cropped turtleneck, both AirPods in, a rose gold laptop plastered with motivational stickers arranged with what I could tell was deliberate aesthetic intention. One sticker said, "Move fast, build better." Another said, "Disrupt or disappear." A third, positioned near the trackpad with what I could only describe as spiritual conviction, said, "Question everything." And she had not questioned the compliance requirements before accessing a regulated financial system with administrative credentials. I was fairly certain of that. What stopped my breath wasn't the stickers or the chair or the music. It was the main compliance terminal. My secure audit interface, the one that took 3 months to configure to FINRA specifications, the one that had passed 2 external security reviews, was gone. In its place was a third-party dashboard I had never approved, never vetted, and never seen in any internal IT request. It had the visual language of a consumer app, rounded corners, gradient color accents, micro-animations on data loads, the general aesthetic of something designed to win a UX award at a tech conference rather than protect the financial records of 40,000 human beings. And in the lower right corner of the screen, pulsing with the amber insistence of something that had been trying to get someone's attention for a while now, was a warning indicator that made my stomach drop through the floor. Encryption protocol. Manual override active. "Oh, Emily, hi!" Brianna spun around in my chair, one AirPod out, the other still in, which told me everything I needed to know about how much of her attention this situation was getting. "Uncle Vince said you were heading out. That's honestly such a bummer, but I'm super excited about what we're building here. I already made some really major improvements." I looked at that amber warning the way a trauma surgeon looks at a monitor showing flatline. Every year I spent in military intelligence, every certification, every 14-hour overnight I'd done in that building, had trained me to recognize exactly what I was seeing and to understand with complete precision what it meant. "Brianna," I said, and my voice was the specific kind of calm that comes from the part of your brain that has bypassed panic entirely and gone straight to damage assessment. "What did you do to the encryption protocols?" She actually made a face, a brief, genuine expression of mild inconvenience, like I'd asked her why she'd moved a decorative plant. "Oh, those? They were causing this insane lag on everything. Like every single time I tried to pull up client data, it made me go through these multiple verification steps that took forever. It was such unnecessary friction in the workflow, so I streamlined it." She gestured at the screen with the satisfaction of someone presenting a completed art project. "Look how fast everything loads now. It's genuinely seamless." I gripped the lanyard of my badge hard enough to feel it bite into my palm. She had not streamlined anything. She had disabled the AES 256 encryption layer, the mathematical architecture that rendered every client's social security number, account number, investment history, and personal identifier completely unreadable to anyone without authenticated clearance. She had removed the multi-factor authentication gates. She had taken the vault door off the building and propped it in the hallway because it was inconvenient to open. I did the math without needing a calculator. Automated credential harvesting bots sweep financial institution endpoints continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Operated by criminal networks sophisticated enough to monetize stolen financial data within minutes of acquisition. With our encryption layer disabled and our authentication gates removed, the first automated scanner would detect our exposed endpoints within 15 to 20 minutes. Within 40 minutes of that, 40,000 client records, names, addresses, social security numbers, account balances, beneficiary information would be packaged, priced, and listed on dark web marketplaces while their owners slept without any idea their financial identities had just been converted into somebody else's inventory. The downstream math was merciless. FINRA fines for a data exposure of this scale start at 7 figures and climb. Class action liability across 40,000 affected clients. Loss of broker-dealer licensing. Criminal referrals for executives whose authorization decisions enabled unqualified access to regulated systems. The quarterly assessment that Vincent had called routine would become the worst day in Callaway Wealth Management's 30-year history. But first, 40,000 people would wake up to the specific horror of financial identity theft. Retired teachers, firefighters, hospital workers, people who had spent careers building a safety net that would now have a hole in it the size of a catastrophe. "That's not a workflow improvement," I said, and I was aware that my voice had gone very quiet, which is always the more dangerous register. "That's a data breach. You've just exposed 40,000 client records to automated harvesting systems running on criminal networks. You've removed the only barriers between this company's entire client base and systematic identity theft." She blinked at me with the patient expression of someone who has been told many times that they are visionary and has therefore concluded that resistance to their vision is simply a failure of imagination. "You're being super negative right now," she said. "Uncle Vince said you'd have a hard time letting go of the old way of doing things. I'm not removing security. I'm optimizing the client data experience for the assessment team. First impressions matter." "First impressions," I repeated. "The FINRA assessment team is going to walk in here and find that your client data is visible to every automated scraper on the internet, and your impression is going to be a federal investigation." Marcus touched my arm. "Ms. Carter, we need to go. I have direct orders." I looked at Brianna, already pivoting back to her rose gold laptop, probably composing a LinkedIn post about her first night revolutionizing legacy financial infrastructure. She had no idea. She was sitting on a loaded device with her hand on the trigger, writing caption copy. I walked to the elevator without another word. There was nothing to teach someone who had decided that being taught was beneath them. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over a name in my contacts: Robert Vance, CEO of Callaway Wealth Management. The man who had built this company from a 2-room brokerage operation in a Columbus strip mall 31 years ago with nothing but a Series 7 license and the conviction that people's retirement money deserved genuine protection. Not just marketing language about protection. He was a handshake man, a follow-through man, the kind of executive who had personally called 3 longtime clients during the 2020 volatility spike just to make sure they weren't panicking alone. He was also 72 years old and almost certainly in bed. I checked the time, 9:31 p.m. The encryption layer had been down for what I estimated was 25 minutes based on when Brianna had arrived. Automated scanners would already be detecting the exposure. I did not have the luxury of waiting for morning. I typed with the economy of someone who spent 4 years in signals intelligence learning that message length and urgency are inversely proportional. Robert. Encryption disabled. Auth layers removed. Brianna Aldridge has admin access. Client data fully exposed to automated harvesting. All examiners arrive in less than 22 hours. I've been terminated. Call me. I hit send. 3 seconds later, my phone rang. How bad? Robert's voice was alert. He sounded like a man who had never fully stopped expecting bad news, which is the correct psychological profile for someone who has been responsible for other people's money for 3 decades. If the exposure has been active for more than 20 minutes, we may already have harvesting in progress, I said. If not, we have a window. But the window is closing. What does she not understand that she should? Everything that has a regulatory citation attached to it. The lobby's digital market display stuttered. Numbers froze mid-scroll. Janet, the night receptionist, frowned at her monitor with the expression of someone who has just noticed water coming through the ceiling. That's strange. My email just stopped loading. I understood exactly why. Our email infrastructure shared authentication clusters with the compliance database, an integration decision made 2 years ago to reduce costs that I had opposed in writing twice and been told I was being obstructionist once each time. With the compliance database choking on cascading errors, it was strangling every connected system in sequence. Bandwidth collapse, I said to no one in particular, watching Janet's mounting confusion with the detached clarity of someone watching a predicted weather event arrive exactly on schedule. The phone lines went next. Not silent, gargled, fragmented, digital static where human voices should have been. Janet reached for the switchboard and got electronic noise in response. She looked at Marcus with wide eyes. Every line is dead. Voice packets are the first casualty when the core database goes into cascade failure, I told Marcus, who was watching the lobby come apart with the expression of a man whose Monday morning sandwiches were looking very far away right now. The processing load collapses outward from the compliance core and takes everything with it. Then I heard what I had been waiting for, footsteps on the stairwell. Hard, urgent, someone who did not have time for an elevator. The door burst open and Donna Fielding stumbled out. Our senior compliance analyst, 14 years at Callaway, mother of 3, the most methodical reader of regulatory documentation I had ever worked with. She was breathing like someone who had just run down 12 flights of stairs in low heels, which she had, because she had. Emily. Her voice carried across the marble lobby like a struck bell. Please. Tell me you're still here. Marcus pointed at me on the leather lobby couch. Donna crossed the distance at a speed that suggested the heels were no longer a consideration. Her blazer had a damp patch between the shoulder blades. It's gone. All of it. The compliance database is in full cascade. Every screen is showing error states. The backup verification keys are rejecting. Transaction logs are writing garbage entries on a loop. Client records are returning null values on query. The system is eating itself. Encryption cascade failure, I said, examining my coffee mug with the studied calm of someone who does not allow crisis to alter their cadence. When the authentication layers get removed without a controlled shutdown protocol, while the database tries to re-encrypt data that no longer has a valid key framework to encrypt to, it loops. Eventually, it starts corrupting the underlying record structure. Donna's face went the color of old parchment. She said the authentication steps were creating unnecessary friction in the workflow experience. I heard a version of that. Emily, please, you have to come up. Vincent is screaming at everyone on the floor. Brianna is in the break room. The Singapore office calls every 90 seconds asking why their portfolio feeds went dark. If we're still down when Asian markets open, you're looking at $800,000 per hour in suspended trading operations, I said. plus FINRA fines for the data exposure, plus civil liability from 40,000 affected clients, plus potential criminal negligence referrals for the executives who authorized unqualified access to regulated systems. I paused. Rough quarter for Vincent's performance review. Please, Emily, I'll do anything. I can't help you, Donna. I was terminated 20 minutes ago for being too rigid. I am officially a security risk, according to the man who just handed administrative access to our entire compliance infrastructure to someone whose most recent professional credential was issued by a website that also certifies life coaches and cryptocurrency advisors. I looked at Marcus. Am I authorized to access company systems? He shook his head. The spring-loaded quality of it suggested it was a deeply uncomfortable gesture. Strict orders, immediate removal from premises, no system access. There you are. I spread my hands. Ma, my hands are tied, and my severance package, I can confirm, does not extend to emergency technical recovery for self-inflicted institutional disasters. The revolving door turned. Robert Vance did not look like the man in the company's annual report. His overcoat was open, his silver hair pushed sideways by Chicago November wind, his phone held at his side like evidence. He walked through the lobby the way men walk when they've spent 30 years understanding that when the foundation shakes, you find the engineer who poured it and you don't ask polite questions about their availability. He walked past Janet, past Donna, past Marcus standing at uncomfortable attention, and came directly to me with the precision of someone who had made up his mind in the car. You knew this would happen, he said. I predicted it, I said, standing. There's a difference between prophecy and pattern recognition. I've been reading the system logs that everyone else treats like background noise for 14 years. Patterns develop. I document them. How bad is it? You have a compromised compliance database going into cascade failure the night before a FINRA assessment, active data exposure across 40,000 client records, and international portfolio feeds going dark in real time. I picked up my coffee mug. And you have Brianna Aldridge in the break room crying, which is the only person in this building who still doesn't fully understand why. Robert closed his eyes for a count of 3. When he opened them, he looked the full weight of his 72 years and the 31 years of reputation currently in freefall. Can you fix it? That depends on what you mean by fix. The database, the exposure, the systems. Yes, but that's the secondary infection. I reached into my jacket and produced my worn leather notebook, the one I'd carried since my second year at Callaway, the one Vincent had called an artifact of legacy thinking every time he saw it on my desk. The primary infection is named Vincent Aldridge. The secondary symptom is named Brianna. The underlying disease is a culture of management that treats expertise as an obstacle and experience as obsolescence. I set the notebook on the arm of the leather couch between us. I need the infection treated before I touch a single line of code. Robert looked at the notebook, then at me. Vincent, he's been with me for... Then start rehearsing your FINRA testimony, I said. Because you are going to need an extremely coherent explanation for how the SVP of Digital Strategy handed administrative access to your compliance infrastructure to someone whose primary qualification was being born into his immediate family, and your answer cannot be, she had a certificate. The lobby had gone very quiet. The gargling phone lines had faded to silence. The digital ticker was a frozen rectangle. Even the air felt like it was waiting. Robert Vance stared at Lake Michigan through the plate glass lobby windows for several seconds. Then he said something I would replay for a long time afterward, not because it was eloquent, but because it was exactly enough. Okay, fix it. All of it. I'll handle Vincent and Brianna. You have everything you need. I need 3 things, I said, picking up the notebook. Full root access restored, immediately. Every non-essential person out of the operations center before I sit down. And actual coffee, not the single-serve pod machine. That thing produces something that tastes like it was filtered through a rubber gasket." Robert went to the landline, the only communications channel still functioning, because it ran on copper lines installed before the internet existed, which I had always privately appreciated for exactly this reason, and issued the authorization in a voice that did not leave room for interpretation. "Security override. Executive authorization. Full credential restoration for user Emily C02. Delta Romeo 9. Immediately." The executive elevator was a different world from the main car. Walnut paneling, smooth mechanism, the faint smell of good leather instead of break room leftovers. Robert leaned against the wall as we passed the 4th floor. "Vincent told me you were burning out," he said, "that you were hostile to change, that you were holding the team back." Vincent defines change as removing the locks from a building full of other people's money because the locks were inconvenient. I opened my notebook to a page marked with a blue rubber band. I define change as building better locks. We were never going to agree on vocabulary. I handed him the open notebook. He read in silence as we passed the 7th floor. "This is," he started, "a full infrastructure risk assessment with documented failure scenarios and step-by-step mitigation protocols," I said. "I presented a version of this to Vincent 6 weeks ago. He said the meeting slot would be better used exploring how AI-powered touchpoints could reimagine the client journey." I paused. Page 11. Section 4. Unauthorized administrative access. Cascade failure scenarios. He read it. His expression did what expressions do when a prediction on paper matches a disaster in progress. It lost color in a specific, understanding way. "Word for word," he said. The only variable I couldn't predict precisely was which specific unqualified person would be given the access. Brianna was one flavor. Could have been anyone with infinite confidence and a 4-month certificate. The outcome was always going to be the same. The elevator opened onto the executive floor and the noise hit immediately. People running with laptops, and someone on a cell phone dictating to what sounded like an international compliance team. Through the glass walls of the IT operations center, screens displayed red error cascades in columns, scrolling continuously, the visual language of a system that had stopped understanding itself. Donna's team, my team, stood in the center of the floor like the survivors of something. Theo Watts, our infrastructure specialist, 17 years with the company, who kept a framed photo of the Chicago skyline on his desk and brought homemade tamales to every team birthday without fail. Priya Nair, our data integrity lead, who had once caught a vendor-side database discrepancy at 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve and called it in without hesitation because that was what the job required. Felix Drummond, junior systems analyst, 2 years in, still learning. But learning the right things because he'd been taught by people who understood what actually mattered. They looked at me the way people look at a surgeon walking into an emergency room when the alternative is a waiting room and a prayer. Vincent was visible through the glass, red-faced, gesticulating at monitors that returned nothing but error codes. The kind of gesturing that looks like leadership from a distance and reveals itself as panic up close. And through the break room glass, Brianna sat alone, mascara in lines down her face, confronting for perhaps the first time the gap between disrupting something and understanding what you'd disrupted. Robert pushed open the operations center doors. The server cooling system washed over us like a meat locker, the processors running hot inside their endless loops. I'm generating heat and no useful output, an apt physical metaphor for 8 months of Vincent's management strategy. "Vincent." Robert's voice was level in the specific way that level voices are more frightening than raised ones. "Brianna." Vincent spun from the monitors, his face cycling through relief, confusion, and then the sour calcium of genuine dread as he registered who had walked in behind the CEO. Robert, thank God. We've been hit. This has the profile of a sophisticated external attack. Eastern European networks are known to target financial. And why is she here? Security was supposed to... This was not an external attack, Robert said. This was your niece operating systems she was not qualified to touch because you gave her credentials she should not have had. And Emily is here because she is the only person in this building who can undo it. The operations center went quiet the way rooms go quiet when someone has said the accurate thing out loud. You're relieved, Robert said. Both of you, tonight. Do not touch anything on your way out. Brianna appeared in the doorway, lower lip assembled in an expression of impending protest. But Uncle Vincent said I was going to lead the digital transformation. I stepped forward. I kept my voice very measured, the way you keep a scalpel very steady. If you touch one more system in this building, I will personally compile a complete documented account of every action you took tonight, time-stamped, access logged, technically annotated, and deliver it to every regulatory body from FINRA to the FBI that has jurisdiction over what you've done. And then I will make sure your professional profiles accurately reflect your actual qualifications, which right now would not clear the bar for an IT help desk position. Vincent's eyes went to my notebook under my arm. He saw something in my expression that his 8 months of corporate authority had apparently not prepared him for, the look of someone who has been right for 14 years and has the documentation to prove every word of it, and the corporate vocabulary that had carried him through every difficult conversation since he made SVP simply was not available to him anymore. My attorney, he started, and the company's legal team will be in conversation with the FINRA examination office before your attorney has responded to their voicemail, Robert said. Consider very carefully who has more to lose in that sequence. Now leave. They left. Vincent with the stiff posture of someone maintaining a fiction of dignity. Brianna with the fragile bewilderment of someone who had been told throughout her entire life that she was exceptional and was experiencing, at a speed that her emotional architecture was not prepared for, the cost of believing it without verification. I turned to my team. Show's over, I said, rolling up my sleeves. Donna, I need a direct terminal connection to the master compliance node. Theo, kill all external API connections right now. We go dark for 4 minutes, no longer. Priya, start mirroring the transaction logs to the disaster recovery sandbox. Raw dump only. Don't try to parse anything yet. Felix, get me a pot of real coffee from the break kitchen, not the pod machine. Law, and I will explain later why this is not a minor detail. Going dark means Singapore, Frankfurt, and London feeds go completely offline, Donna said. Her voice was steadier now, the relief of competent direction visible in her posture. They're already offline, I replied, sitting at the main console. We're not creating new problems. We're stopping the existing one from becoming permanent. I produced a disinfectant wipe from my jacket pocket and cleaned every key on the keyboard before touching them, because keyboards carry more bacteria than a gas station restroom, and I was not putting my hands on something Brianna had operated without a thorough wipe down. Keyboards are public health hazards. This is not paranoia. This is microbiology. Theo almost laughed. Almost. Robert? I said without turning. You might want to step back from my immediate workspace. I'm about to execute approximately 7 emergency bypass protocols that violate corporate IT policy, and I would prefer that your plausible deniability remain intact. Just fix it, he said, working on it. I cracked my knuckles, a habit I developed in the Army when systems were down and the mission was waiting. Took a long sip from my insulated mug, and looked at the main screen with the specific attention of someone who built the thing and knows where every joint and seam is. The screen was a graveyard of stacked error messages, red text on dark background, fatal exceptions accumulating in columns. Brianna had managed to drive our distributed compliance architecture into a single-threaded processing loop. And it was functionally equivalent to trying to route a river through a drinking straw, technically possible to initiate, catastrophic in practice, and not fixable by telling the river to be more patient. "Listen up," I said, not loudly. My team had never needed volume from me. They needed precision, which is different. We are performing emergency surgery on a patient in cascade failure. The goal is not to make it look good. The goal is to get the heart beating again. Everything else follows from that. Donna, transaction logs mirrored yet? Mirroring now. 62%. Theo, external maintenance flags to Singapore, London, and Frankfurt. Tell them we are running a scheduled optimization cycle. It is technically a misdirection, but it buys us 18 to 20 minutes before their legal teams start calling ours. Flag sent. I turned to the core database cluster. It was running in the worst way a database can run. Not crashed, not frozen, but actively destroying itself, writing corrupted data entries over valid ones, in a loop that was methodical and merciless. I had seen it once before, in a simulation I ran in my disaster recovery sandbox 3 years earlier, a sandbox that Vincent had twice proposed defunding because it was consuming server resources that could be redirected toward what he called forward-looking infrastructure investment. I had declined to defund it both times, which at the time registered as inflexibility and which right now registered as the only reason this situation was recoverable. "Opening root command terminal," I announced. The black screen opened, white cursor blinking. I had been looking at this interface since the early 2000s, and it had never once failed to feel like standing in front of something that would do exactly what you told it to, which meant that what you told it had better be precise. I typed the command sequence that would either save the company or finish the job Brianna had started. Force shutdown of the master compliance service. Controlled flatline before restart. "You're killing the master process," Theo said, and I could hear the careful quality of someone who trusted me but needed to say it out loud. "Defibrillator," I said, keeping my eyes on the screen. "You stop the heart to restart it. The alternative is letting it keep running while it destroys the data we need to recover. Sometimes the most aggressive move is the right one." I hit execute. "Clear." Every screen went black. The server fans wound down from their frantic pitch to a whisper. The room entered a silence so complete I could hear Robert's watch and Felix's breathing and the distant sound of Chicago traffic 17 floors below. The specific silence of a system that has been stopped. "Did we lose everything?" Priya asked, and her voice was barely sound. "We wait," I said. I picked up my coffee mug. The coffee had gone cold, which was irrelevant. I had done every significant thing in my career on cold coffee because I was too busy to drink it while it was hot, and I had decided years ago that this was not a sacrifice but a fact. I built this system. I built it to be recoverable. Give it time to remember that. 17 seconds of silence. Then a single line of green text on the main monitor, appearing with the quiet authority of a heartbeat after resuscitation. System recovery initiated, integrity check in progress, legacy failsafe detected. Emily trusts nobody. V22. Robert stepped closer. "What is that?" "That," I said, pointing at the screen with my coffee mug in the manner of a professor who has been waiting a long time to teach this particular lesson, "is the legacy liability that Vincent wanted to decommission. It is a complete encrypted mirror of our entire compliance infrastructure, generated in full every 4 hours for the past 4 years, stored in an isolated recovery partition with its own independent encryption key, invisible to anyone who doesn't know it exists. Untouchable by anyone who doesn't have my personal decryption credential." I looked at him steadily. Brianna could not delete what she never knew was there. She did not know it was there because she did not read the documentation. She did not read the documentation because no one told her she needed to, and she did not ask because she was confident. Green text began cascading down every monitor in the room, filling screens the way water fills a vessel from the bottom, orderly and unstoppable. Compliance table restoration, 24%, 47%, 71%. Theo, I said, prepare to reopen external feeds on my mark. When this hits full restoration, we are going to receive approximately 6 hours of backlogged international transactions in a compressed window. Your hands need to be ready. Ready, Theo confirmed. Donna, and verify encryption layer integrity on your terminal as it comes up. I want confirmation before we expose anything to external networks. Watching it now. The counter climbed. 84%, 93%, 99%. Restore complete. All systems nominal. Encryption layers verified. Threat surface closed. Mark, I said. Theo executed. Every monitor in the room erupted back into function simultaneously, the global portfolio map illuminating across 6 continents, portfolio feeds from Singapore, London, and Frankfurt surging with the backlogged data they'd been waiting to transmit. The compliance database returning clean query responses for the first time in hours. The collective exhale from my team was audible over the server fans. We're stable, Donna announced, and her voice cracked in a way she probably did not intend to allow. All systems green, encryption verified and active. Latency is actually running lower than pre-incident levels. Because I cleared 4 years of accumulated query debris during the restart, I said. Controlled shutdowns do that. The system has been carrying dead weight in its processing queues since the last major migration. Tonight's forced restart inadvertently cleaned it. I finished my cold coffee. Sometimes the disaster does the maintenance you couldn't schedule. Robert stood at the restored displays, the way people stand when they have watched something they expected to be irreparably broken reassemble itself on its own logic. He looked like a man who had just watched an argument he'd been losing for years resolve itself in his favor in real time. Systems recovered, I said, setting my mug down. Client assets secure. A compliance database is audit ready. Your international offices are reconnected. Your FINRA examiners will arrive tomorrow morning to a fully functional, fully documented, fully encrypted infrastructure. I turned to face him directly. The quarterly assessment will go fine. What happens in the assessment after this one depends on decisions you make tonight. The emergency board meeting convened at 6:15 a.m. in the 31st floor conference room, which had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a Lake Michigan that was doing its particular October shade of gray-green. 11 board members in business attire at a table that cost more than my car, with untouched coffee and the particular focused attention of people who have had a very expensive near miss and are processing their feelings about it in real time. E. Roberts sat at the head of the table. I sat at his right hand. I was wearing my olive jacket and carrying my notebook and my coffee mug because I had not been home yet, and I was not going to perform a wardrobe change for an audience that existed because of a disaster I had just prevented. I was also not going to apologize for the jacket. The crisis has been contained, Roberts said, without the elaborate preamble that boards usually required. Our compliance infrastructure is fully restored. Client assets are secure. The FINRA assessment this morning will proceed without incident. He paused. Due to the work of our new Chief Information Security Officer, Emily Carter. Every head at the table turned. I did not shift in my chair or adjust my expression. And I'd spent 4 years in Army intelligence being looked at by rooms of people deciding what I was worth. The calculation was the same now as it was then. Show them exactly what you are and let them figure out what to do with it. Ms. Carter, said the board chair, a former federal judge named Arthur Brennan, who had the eyes of someone who had listened to a great many people tell him things that weren't entirely true. Can you guarantee that the events of last night will not recur? As long as all system access and personnel decisions affecting critical infrastructure require my explicit written authorization, I said. And as long as the word friction is permanently retired from our internal technology vocabulary and replaced with the word protection, yes. Oh, I can guarantee it. He looked at me for a moment with the particular expression of someone recalibrating an assessment. That's an unusual condition. It is a precise condition, I said. The difference between unusual and necessary is documentation, and I have 14 years of it. Arthur Brennan smiled at that, briefly and genuinely. Motion to ratify the appointment of Emily Carter as Chief Information Security Officer with the stated authorization conditions. It passed without a dissenting vote. I walked out of that meeting with a title that carried actual weight, a salary with a number that I'd never said out loud before because I'd been told for 14 years that I was compensated fairly, equity that would put Oliver through graduate school if he wanted it, a veto authority over every technical hire and infrastructure decision in the building. But I also walked out knowing something that Vincent Aldridge's 8 months of synergy slides had never managed to understand and probably never would. The most valuable thing in that building was never the client money. It was the promise that the money was safe. The promise that the people who had spent their careers saving it could trust that someone at Callaway Wealth Management was staying up late enough to make sure that promise held. I had been that person for 14 years. I would continue to be that person, now with the institutional authority to do it properly. Back in the operations center, my domain, the room I had spent more nights in than my own living room, I settled into my chair. The good chair, the one Brianna had borrowed and would not be returning, which I had wiped down thoroughly before sitting in it, because habits of hygiene are habits for a reason. The monitors glowed green across every metric. System integrity at 100%. Encryption layers active and verified. Audit trails clean, complete, and fully accessible to the FINRA examiners who would arrive in 4 hours. The digital pulse of $12 billion in assets, steady and strong, and entirely where it was supposed to be. I opened my desk drawer and found the bottle of bourbon I kept for occasions that had genuinely earned it. Single malt, 12 years, a gift from Donna on the occasion of our 10th anniversary working together, which she had presented with a card that said, "For the next disaster," which I had appreciated for its accuracy. And I poured 2 fingers into my Cubs mug and raised it toward the monitors. 14 years, 3 market crashes, 1 ransomware attempt, 4 SVPs, each more convinced than the last that my approach to security was an obstacle to progress. And one night that proved, in the most expensive possible terms, that there is a difference between a system that looks secure and a system that is secure, and the difference is built by people who read the documentation all the way to the end and don't stop reading because it gets inconvenient. Too rigid, I said quietly to the hum of processors that had survived the night, because I had built them to survive exactly this. Turns out rigid is just what they call you when they don't want to admit that you were right. The servers hummed. The monitors glowed. The coffee was cold and perfect. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in late October. Gray sky, sharp wind, the kind of morning that doesn't apologize for itself. Somewhere in that city, teachers and firefighters and hospital workers were waking up to the unexceptional fact that their retirement accounts were exactly where they had left them the night before. They had no idea how close that fact had come to being untrue. They had no idea there was a woman in an olive jacket on the 14th floor who had stayed up all night to make sure they didn't have to find out. That was fine. That was, in fact, the point. The best infrastructure is the kind nobody notices, because it never fails. The best security is the kind that stops the disaster before it requires a press release. The best architect is the one who builds the wall thick enough that nobody ever needs to know the wall was there. I finished my bourbon, poured the coffee that Felix had made, which was real coffee from actual beans, and tasted like a person who understood what the occasion required. Vincent Aldridge and Brianna had learned something last night. Or they hadn't. Some people require more than one expensive lesson, and some people require the kind of lesson that arrives from a regulatory agency with official letterhead. Either way, that was no longer my problem to manage. My problem to manage was the FINRA assessment team arriving at 9 o'clock, and the compliance documentation that needed to be perfectly organized. Now and the $12 billion that needed protecting today, the same way it had needed protecting yesterday and would need protecting tomorrow. Some problems don't resolve. They just require someone willing to keep showing up. I was very willing. I always had been. That was the part they never put on the termination paperwork. The part where being too rigid, too paranoid, too obsessive about documentation and redundancy and encrypted fail-safes that nobody knew existed. The part where all of that turns out to be the only thing standing between 40,000 people and the worst morning of their financial lives. They called it a liability. I called it a job. And I was, it turned out, very good at it. The monitors hummed. The city woke up. The assets were safe. And somewhere in a 31st floor conference room, the board of Callaway Wealth Management was beginning to understand the difference between the person who disrupts the foundation and the person who built it in the first place. It's not always a comfortable distinction, but it is, reliably, a true one.